I'd like to welcome everybody to today's Great Lakes and Mississippi River Interbasin Study for GLMRIS public meeting. My name is Kevin Bloom, and I'm from the Army Corps of Engineers in St. Paul District, and will be this evening's moderator. We are pleased that you have taken the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. Now I'd like to introduce the panel. Starting on the far side of the table from myself, we have General Margaret Burcham and Honorable Ms. Darcy from the ASA office, Assistant Secretary of the Army, thank you. And from the Chicago District and our project manager, Mr. Dave Weddington. And then closest to myself is Mr. John Goss, and you'll hear from most of these people here in just a few minutes. The GLMRIS report in its entirety can be downloaded from the GLMRIS website. That address is located on several of the handouts, http GLMRIS or glmris.anl.gov, and you can download pieces or the whole thing. Our GLMRIS team has organized this public meeting to accomplish two different goals. Our first is to present the information contained in that GLMRIS report for you in a summary format. And secondly, and more importantly though, we want to solicit any public input on that information that's presented in the report. Comments then will be compiled and posted on the GLMRIS website. For comments to be formally included, they need to be given during a oral comment period at one of our meetings, or submitted in as a written form comment, or submitted as a website comment through the project website. So at this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Dave.
Ms. Darcy.
Okay, to Ms. Darcy, very good.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Joellen Darcy, and I'm the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. And for those of you who may or may not be familiar with the Army, we are the Army Corps of Engineers has a very specific and genuine and unique mission within the Army. And my job is to oversee the civil works portion of that part of the portfolio. And I'm really proud and actually humbled to be in this position, and also to be able to be here today. To not only go over and listen to all of you about your reactions to and your concerns with the GLMRIS report, but also to publicly acknowledge the work of the Army Corps of Engineers on this study. The Congress directed the Army Corps of Engineers to conduct this study, this GLMRIS study, in different authorizations, and the most recent was an amendment to what's called MAP 21, which is the Highway Transportation Bill. And we were directed to complete this study within 18 months. And the study was to look at all of the aquatic nuisance species within the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes, and determine what those species were, what the aquatic pathways were, and to develop some alternatives and some technological as well as other solutions on how to keep aquatic invasive species from transferring between the basin and the river. We've come up with 8 alternatives that Dave is going to go into in depth with all of you. And as you mentioned, the full report is available on our website. If you want to download it, be prepared because it's a big one. But what you mentioned in the summary, I think it's one of my better products. I've worked, before this job, I worked with the Army Corps of Engineers and have been interested and part of this organization for a long time, and this is one of the best reports we've done. And one of the reasons is because we've looked at alternatives and technologies that we think are going to best try to find a solution to what could be an impending problem. I also, I'm here today to kick off the first of these 7 public hearings, but the reason for these public hearings is to hear from people in this audience, because you're the people who live here, you're the stakeholders, you're the ones who are going to be impacted by whatever you do. The expertise of this agency is world-renowned, and I think that we are very fortunate to be able to have these kinds of professionals looking at all the alternatives that we can bring to bear to try to help with the solution to this problem. I want to, General Burcham, who is our division commander, has stepped up and done just a great job with making this report get over the finish line. You know, 18 months was a very difficult and time frame in order for us to execute, but we did, and we came up with 8 alternatives. I also want to recognize Dave. Dave's going to be giving you the technical portions and explain each of these alternatives, but he has been phenomenal. He has made me, who's not a hydraulic engineer, understand how the water moves, and that's quite a feat. You know, I was a philosophy major. I knew nothing about hydrology or anything, but I now have learned a great deal, not only from him, but his full team, and he's just done a great job, and I just think that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Dave and his thank you so much, and his leadership. And also our district commander, Colonel Drummond, is here too, our Chicago District Commander. Dave took the lead on this, but it was actually an effort throughout the entire Corps of Engineers. It wasn't just the Chicago District. We have expertise. We have biologists from around the country and a number of other areas of expertise within our agency that we've brought to bear, as well as other federal agencies and the local stakeholders here, especially in the Great Lakes region. I'm not from Chicago, but one of my previous jobs was working in Michigan, so I feel like I'm coming home when I come to the Great Lakes. So I'm really proud to be here, and I want to introduce our next person, John Goff. I think John has helped to bring a focus to this solution in a very unique way. He's from Louisiana, he's from the region, but he also, I think you can all appreciate the fact that the potential for this problem is one that's gotten the attention of everyone, and including the President. John is our coordinator in the Council of Environmental Quality, and that's a new position because of the importance of this issue, not only to all of you here in Great Lakes, but to the country as a whole. So with that, I really look forward to hearing from all of you, and please don't be shy. We're here to listen. We did this report so that we could hear from the stakeholders so that you can make your own recommendations and decisions about what the best path forward is in order to solve this problem. Thank you all very much.
Secretary Darcy, thank you for your wisdom and leadership. Congratulations to General Birch and Colonel Drummond, the entire GLMRIS team, for getting this project done on time so that we can now have a little break in the research for 60 days or so for education and understanding and discussion on what should we do next. So we are asking you today and over the next few weeks to really think about what you hear today and to get back to us on priorities and what you think, or your organization, if you represent a group, think would be the next best things to do as we work forward on this, and hopefully we can develop a consensus around the Great Lakes states that one or maybe 2 alternatives go forward. Ideally, if we could get it to 1, it would be nice, but that may not happen. But certainly, contributions to the discussion are important from everyone. So, again, thanks to the team for getting us to this point. I'd like to talk about alternative 1 just for about 3 or 4 minutes, which is the current situation with Asian carp control programs. We have a regional coordinating committee, which you've probably heard of, federal, state, and local agencies that have really formed a cohesive team, a 4-part strategy, which includes the electric barrier system, which needs to be effective, an extensive monitoring and response program, looking for carp and making sure that we don't have carp getting into the Great Lakes, and development of control technologies. We've got a half dozen research teams that are making significant progress on ways to, if not get rid of carp, at least find ways to capture them with harvesting and other technologies. And then the long-term program, which is GLMRIS, that you're going to hear mostly about today. The focus for this team over the next 3 years will be to work with the electric barrier current systems and ways to make it more effective. You probably heard there have been some recent findings that small fish may still not be completely stopped in the barrier. We're going to be working with the transportation industry people on a task force and come up with some solutions for that in the near term. Also, we'll be field testing some of these other technologies that scientists have been working on. We have made progress on a micromatrix fish toxicant, which would only affect Asian carp. If other fish consumed it, it would not kill them. And also looking at some possible deterrents, things that could work with the GLMRIS lock that you're going to hear about today, in addition to technology that Dave's going to explain. There are some others that we're still looking at as possibilities that might be additional ways to block Asian carp. Commercial harvesting will continue to be a big part of the strategy. Over 50,000 big heads and silver carp have been taken out of the Illinois River south of the electric barrier in 2013, and we will continue that effort, in addition to a lot of other fish netting and eDNA sampling, both above and below the barrier in the Chicago Waterway and around the Great Lakes, too. This report does not deal with the other pathways. I'm just going to give you a quick update. 18 other connections, potential connections across the Continental Divide were identified in this project earlier. It's just not part of the recommendations today. And Eagle Marsh in Indiana was found to be the highest risk area. I can give you a positive update on that project with Indiana DNR's leadership and Natural Resource Conservation Service. We will have a full project proposal coming forward by next spring in 2014 to close off that water connection at flood stage on Eagle Marsh, which has been a big concern, as a possible pathway from the Wabash River to Lake Erie. Also in Ohio, there are two connections that the state of Ohio is taking the lead on to help put together a plan to sever those connections. All the other locations were found to be low risk or not even a medium risk for Asian carp. Across the rest of the states that are impacted by Asian carp, there is the beginnings of a program it's called the National Asian Carp Control Program to deal with the rivers and the populations that are already significantly affecting our native fish population in the rivers. That's going to continue to develop. Beyond the Great Lakes states, it's going to be important I think, to get Congress to act on funding to continue to include the Mississippi and Ohio basin states and even the Missouri River and the lower Mississippi River drainage basin states as part of this. So we have 8 states that are primarily affected by the threat to the Great Lakes, but we've got 30-some additional states that have a stake in this, need to bring into the discussion and work with their congressional delegations also in the next year or so. The Great Lakes has been successful with a number of projects with significant cooperation and collaboration. I'll just mention a few. Sea lamprey control started in the 1950s as the first major invasive species coordinated effort with Fisheries Commission and all the states participating. Great Lakes Water Quality Initiative was another significant development that now is international, Canadian, and U.S. effort. The Great Lakes Compact to control the water levels and make sure that we protect that was a significant accomplishment with all the states pulling together to get that adopted. And then, for the past 5 years, we've had the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is a very unique regional improvement project that is funding the Asian Carp Control Program primarily already. So we are now poised at the point where we have alternatives to look at for Asian carp control, and the challenge is, can the Great Lakes states do it again? Can we all pull together? I just want to give you just a couple other comments. I think that the interest groups across the Great Lakes have made significant contributions to this GLMRIS study. Up to this point, this is really just kind of a midpoint in this whole process, and we certainly need your help to continue to give us feedback on these alternatives and help form a consensus for moving forward. Congress has said they'd like to get back to, action as soon as possible. You've heard from a number of members of Congress this week. So I think the consensus discussion starts today. We'll continue through the public meetings discussion in the next couple of months, but hopefully by early spring we could develop some consensus. So I'm asking you to help us get together on what we can agree on so that we can move forward after today. Thank you. Dave?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Weddington. I am the project manager here with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Chicago District. And I appreciate very much Mr. Darcy, General Bertram, Colonel Drummond, Mr. Goss for joining us today. This has been very much a collaborative effort, and it's also been a large team effort. And I do admit that I didn't mention my team that spans from Alaska to Jacksonville, who have been significant contributors toward the success you see in this report that we published on time and on schedule. What I'd like to do is spend just a couple minutes this evening and speak to you about what you'll find in the report. I hope that a lot of you had the opportunity to at least pick up one of these books as you came in. This is really a fantastic summary that will really boil 230-some pages of effort down, or even several thousands of pages of appendices down into something that's easily digestible. You can kind of also follow along with me because my presentation today, I'm only going to do about 15 or so slides, but I will follow in very general the format in that book. So the study itself, we set out to identify a range of options and technologies that are available to prevent the transfer of aquatic species between the Great Lakes and Mississippi River Basin. Our goals were twofold. We wanted to prevent aquatic species transfer to the greatest extent possible, while also looking at what kind of mitigation or how would we compensate for adverse impacts to existing use, and I'll highlight those for you in a moment. Stakeholder engagement has always been a very big part of our process, and that's why it's important that we have meetings like this so that we can hear from folks such as yourself. In July of 2012, our study process was slightly realigned and by legislation was introduced, and it asked us to do a number of things, and one of the elements was produce a report within 18 months, and that legislation was enacted in July of 2012, July 6, 2012, and on January 6, 2014, we produced a report within 18 months. That report focused our efforts on the Chicago Area Waterway System and evaluated hydrologic separation as one of the alternatives for potential transfer between the basins. Here in Chicago, I think it's probably a fair assumption that most of us are familiar with the operation of the Chicago Area Waterway System. However, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least spend a moment talking about the significant uses. Primarily, the three that we have addressed in most detail include navigation, water supply and conveyance, and flood risk management. The Chicago Area Waterway System is the primary connection between the two basins, and each of these uses is very important to acknowledge, and when we formulate our plans to basically have a baseline plan. The report itself describes a range of alternatives. It does not give a recommendation. It does not list a ranking of alternatives, but it provides a conceptual design of a range of alternatives much as the original legislation asked us. It provides for general mitigation requirements of the alternatives to offset any adverse impacts of those main uses, that navigation, that flood risk management, that water conveyance that I spoke to. It is best used, though, as an alternative, as a tool for alternative decision-making. The information in the report is provided to you, to our stakeholders, to federal agencies, state agencies, and our congressional interests, with a range of alternatives and a range of evaluation criteria to help understand how the different types of alternatives will impact those existing uses and users while trying to achieve that goal of prevention. There would, however, be additional analyses necessary for any single one of these alternatives prior to moving to a construction phase. What we've done is try to accomplish as much as we can within that 18-month period. However, there's the additional work such as compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, or additional Corps of Engineers requirements like independent external peer review or state and agency review for any one of these plans. I'm going to spend a moment talking with you about how, essentially, we took the steps to come up with the alternatives in the report. And drilling down into there, it's almost as simple as three main things. First, we identified what are the connections between the basins. Within the GLMRIS report, we looked at specifically Chicago Area Waterways because that's what we were legislated to look at. Then we evaluated species. We started out with over 200 different types of aquatic species that could potentially transfer between the basins. We identified, of those, approximately 35 that pose some sort of significant risk for transfer and further establishment. Of those 35, we conducted a risk assessment, and we looked at the probability and the consequence of each of those 35 from transferring from one side of the basin to the other, and we assigned a risk rating. And we did look specifically at it's an 80% chance that we'll have, of causing some adverse impact, but we assigned a qualitative ranking of high, medium, or low. And we used that ranking to help identify the success of the alternatives in the study. So we take the connections, we take the species, and we take the controls and use that information along with additional background information to compile and describe the alternatives. Before I get into the alternatives themselves, I want to just highlight some of the primary control technologies that you'll see within the GLMRIS report. You're likely familiar with most of them: physical barrier, screen gates, electric barriers with maybe a new twist on with a constructive engineered channel. We've also got the concept of the GLMRIS lock and the aquatic nuisance species treatment plan. Those two are fairly new concepts that came out of the research in GLMRIS. Very simply, the GLMRIS lock is a flushing lock that is a little bit different from existing navigation locks, which largely rely on gravity to fill and empty them. GLMRIS locks would use pump technology to, at one end, push water out, push water in, while at the other end is pushing water out or pulling water out. It would essentially replace volumes of ANS-containing water with ANS-treated water from our aquatic nuisance species treatment plant. The treatment plant technologies are not something that's very new or novel, but they're used for treating specifically for aquatic nuisance species is. The concepts behind aquatic nuisance species treatment are very similar to those that are used in drinking water cleaning technology. So I'm going to spend just a couple moments going over each of these alternative plans. I don't know if you can see it at the bottom. You can follow along in the book. We're at Alternative Plan 1. And Alternative Plan 1 is what we call the No New Federal Action Plan, but I prefer to call it Sustained Activities Plan. We call it Sustained Activities because no new federal action makes it sound like we're not doing anything. And that's, per what John and Darcy said, are not the case at all. There is a very extensive network of activities that are being completed by not only the Corps of Engineers, but other federal and state and other resource management agencies. Efforts such as management for the lamprey or the snakehead, and as well as activities that are being led by the Corps of Engineers, including the construction and operation of the barriers, as well as other monitoring and GLMRI sponsored activities. We use the baseline alternative as kind of a measuring stick. That is which we compare other alternatives to. Alternative 2 is the non-structural control technologies alternative. This can be very simply explained by the implementation of aquatic nuisance species controls, ANS controls, that do not require the construction of any kind of physical structure. Some examples include active management, education outreach, laws and regulations. Active management, for example. If we can identify where a specific aquatic nuisance species of concern is, such as a invasive plant, and use technologies like herbicides to address those plants where they are right now, we can, in effect, prevent their transfer. Things like education and outreach, new laws and regulations are kind of the linchpins on which we can get that successful shared responsibility, that public involvement, and helping all of us fight aquatic nuisance species. We must recognize, as recreational anglers, that dumping bait buckets from one basin to the other is not a practice that we should pursue, and that cleaning our boats after pulling them out from one waterway, putting them into the other, is a best management practice. Successful implementation of all these, as I alluded to, is a shared responsibility. We include these as best management practices in all of the alternatives because we feel that they are really a good way to proceed and could be effective in helping further buy down the risk, reduce the risk of a future aquatic nuisance species movement. The advantage to non-structural control technologies is they are very quick to implement. With your proper authority and the proper resource agencies, they can be implemented tomorrow, assuming that there are required resources. Now, this estimated cost we've come up with is very much an estimate. It was arrived at by getting information from various state agencies that implement aquatic nuisance species management plans and taking an average of what those costs are on an annual basis, multiplying by the number of states that are along their watershed divide, and coming up with a number. Now, $68 million a year is a significant amount of money. Could it be less? Certainly. Could it be a little bit more? Certainly. But additional efforts, additional research, additional investigation, such as with any of these alternatives, would be necessary to more clearly identify those needed costs. Alternative number 3, the full bypass alternative, is the first of 2 technology alternatives I'll discuss today. The 2 technology alternatives are very similar. However, one, the full bypass, looks at two-way prevention of aquatic species transfer, two-way control of aquatic species transfer. So these 2 points, one located at Stickney and one located at Cal-Sag, are, again, conceptual representations of where you would put a large aquatic species treatment plant. The purpose of this treatment plant would be to treat the flow of the waterway that comes past each of those approximate points. It essentially runs the volume of the Chicago River, much as you see outside, through an aquatic species treatment plant, such that on the other side, the water comes out ANS free. It would also include the GLMRIS lock feature, bookended by electric barriers on either side to allow navigation to continue in this alternative. Since each of these 2 alternatives essentially operate during the dry weather flow of the river, the treatment plants are sized to the dry weather flow of the system, you would need much larger ANS treatment plants in order to deal with the large precipitation-driven events that we frequently see in the Chicago Area Waterway. Instead of building a plant that's 10, 20, 50 times too large for daily operation, we've included mitigation in the sense of conveyance tunnels and reservoirs to deal with the 500-year flood risk within the system. Now, you may ask, why did the Corps of Engineers choose to use a 500-year, what we call the 500-year flood in our plan formulation? The reason for that is over the past 5 years, we've had at least 3, if not 4 instances where we had 100-year or greater precipitation events localized within the Chicago Area Waterway System. If we were to construct an ANS treatment plant or a physical barrier that could be swamped by that 100-year event, it would essentially be in effect. And so we wanted to be protective of the plan itself, and that is to control the aquatic species transfer between the basins. The estimated time for completion of this is driven primarily by the mitigation features, by those tunnels and reservoirs, at about 25 years, with an estimated cost of about $15.5 billion. I'll pause for a moment to talk about the cost. We were very thorough and we used traditional Corps of Engineers cost estimating techniques. However, we certainly do not have the necessary volumes of information or the specificity of information that we need to come up with, for example, for authorizing a new project. These costs are best used to compare the different alternatives amongst each other. So when you see one alternative $15.5 billion and the other one is $7.5 billion, you can say that the likely implementation of this alternative versus the other may cost about half those resources. The second of the 2 alternatives, 2 technology alternatives, is the CAWS buffer zone alternative. And I'll spend a moment on this. The idea behind this is, as opposed to having two-way control points, so essentially the control points for two-way transfer of aquatic species, this splits the system into a ANS managed system, or an ANS buffer zone, as we call it, where the entire area that you see shaded in white here is managed as an ANS control zone. So we have one-way choke points down here near Joliet is where this point is, Brandon Lock, as well as a series of control points along Lake Michigan or just inland from the lake that serve as one-way barriers. So the purpose of these points, these aquatic species treatment plants, the GLMRIS locks, is to prevent species from coming in from the lake down the system, down into the buffer zone. The purpose of this Brandon Road point is to keep species down from the Illinois River from coming up into the Lake Michigan buffer zone. And so we have a couple opportunities with regard to this buffer zone concept. We operate it, again, as an ANS control zone where we can monitor and look for potential passage of any of these systems, of any of these species, as well as allow for the existing operation of a lot of the existing uses of the system. For example, when you have significant precipitation events and you need to move water in multiple directions very quickly, you can still backflow water out into Lake Michigan and out down the stream, because the input water that would fall somewhere in the city would be strictly precipitation. And so since you do not have aquatic species in that buffer control zone, you're able to move water and deal with it effectively in that sense. The estimated time for completion of this alternative is about 10 years, And that's really kind of dictated by the flood risk management features that are constructed down here at a reservoir of about 4.4 billion gallons down in the northwest Indiana, southeast Illinois state line area. And the cost is about $7.8 billion. The next two scenarios, alternative plans 5 and 6, are the hydrologic separation scenarios. And we took two different takes on hydrologic separation. One was to look at how to minimize water quality impacts to the system. The other was how to minimize flood risk to the system. So this one, in terms of our mitigation, we have to mitigate significantly for flood risk. And let me explain a little bit about that. So in the lakefront hydrologic separation scenario, we place a number of physical barriers at or adjacent to the lakefront to prevent surface waters from transferring between Great Lakes and Mississippi River Basin. In this sense, you are unable to, especially in the Chicago region, to move water out of the Chicagoland area during significant precipitation events. In order to compensate for this, you need to construct large conveyance tunnels and large reservoirs to hold that water that can now not move into Lake Michigan. Therefore, you have large reservoirs at approximate volume of about 6.5 billion and 13.5 billion gallons. Again, this mitigation is specifically for flood risk. Estimated time for completion, again, is about 25 years for the cost of approximately $18.4 billion. The MIT system has kind of the opposite effect. So what we've done here is put 2 points in the middle of the system adjacent to where the kind of original, if you go way back to the 1800s, the original kind of hydrologic divide was between the two systems. So here we've optimized for hydrology. We've optimized so that there wouldn't be significant flooding impact to the system. However, what happens when you do this is you open up the entire Chicago Area Waterway System and the existing infrastructure, which includes 2 significant water reclamation plants, as well as a couple hundred combined sewer outfalls that will now feed directly into Lake Michigan as an unmitigated impact. So instead of causing this potentially significant water quality impact on Lake Michigan, what we've chosen to do is mitigate for those impacts by channeling, using the green pipe, channeling the effluent from the water reclamation plant to a point downstream of the barrier, as well as capturing all of these combined sewer outfall tunnels and capturing them, putting them into a reservoir. Now you say, well, why don't we just upgrade these plants so they can discharge back into Lake Michigan? Well, it's going to be very difficult to do. Likely, based on conversations with the federal and state regulators, you need something to the extent of reverse osmosis in order to be able to treat the water sufficiently to meet Lake Michigan water quality standards. Reverse osmosis has been used pretty much in desalination for drinking water. Reverse osmosis, one of the largest reverse osmosis plants in the world, deals with about 100 million gallons a day of water. The combined outflow of these two ranges between 600 and 700 million gallons per day. So the largest RO plant in the world doesn't even come up with 20% of the necessary throughput we need for the system. So we've decided to instead channel the effluent, and then there's a second reason we decided to move that water reclamation plant effluent downstream to make up for navigation. That 600 to 700 million gallons per day total flow from those two systems, from those two water reclamation plants, flows directly down into the Illinois River. You might be familiar, about a year ago or so, we had significant drought conditions along the Mississippi and trickled up to the Illinois waterway. So if you were to remove about half of the total flow to supply the Illinois waterway, there would likely be significant navigation challenges. So that's kind of the rationale for choosing this mitigation scenario. Again, we're looking at an estimated completion time of about 25 years, and a cost of about 15.5 billion gallons. I won't spend too much time on the next two, except for saying that they are combinations of physical barriers on either the top part of the system or the bottom part of the system, in combination with technologies which allow the opposite side of the system to continue existing uses like navigation. So, as it suggests, the Cal-Sag open scenario puts a physical barrier on the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal while leaving the Cal-Sag channel open, and the CSSC open does the opposite. It puts a physical barrier on the Cal-Sag channel while leaving the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal open. You'll see that the two differences in cost between these scenarios, the Cal-Sag open, because of the high amount of mitigation costs necessary, We have a cost of approximately $15.1 billion, with an estimated completion time of about 25 years, and the other one is about half the cost, about $8.3 billion, the same estimated time for completion. Now, the report that we have, the GLMRIS report itself, will have evaluation criteria established for each one of the alternatives. And we have it summarized in a matrix and a table where you can easily compare for example, the effectiveness of a control technology comparatively to the cost, or how long it would take to implement, or what kind of economic impacts there may be. So again, when we set out to put this report together, really the biggest and the most important part was to provide information for decision makers. And that's what I'm really proud of in this report, is the wealth of information that exists within the GLMRIS report. A couple things that I hope to leave you here with today, that I kind of termed additional considerations, and I hope that I've been able to at least touch upon them over the few minutes I've been up here speaking today, is mitigation. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that it's going to take 25 years or cost $15 billion to put a dam in a river that used to be outside. What I will tell you is it'll take that long, and it'll be that expensive to mitigate for those adverse impacts to the existing uses, those including flood risk, water quality, or navigation. And so the timing and the cost of the alternatives are very closely linked to the mitigation which is necessary to ensure that we do not cause an adverse impact to the community, to the citizens of Chicago, or to the existing uses of the system. No matter what, there will always be residual risk. I've heard many times that we must pursue hydrologic separation as the only sure way to prevent aquatic species transfer. While it may do a very effective job at preventing aquatic transfer, it is not necessarily a sure way, because there are many other ways that species can transfer between basins. I spoke to bait buckets. I spoke to the potential illegal movement of species like Asian carp, which over the past couple of years there have been many instances of truckloads of live Asian carp being stopped at the Canadian border on their way to market in Canada. We also look at the duration for implementation as a residual risk. Many of these scenarios, we have approximately about 25 years to complete, and there is a chance that one or more of these species may have the opportunity to transfer between the basins during that time. Obviously, things like non-structural controls and additional management options may buy down that risk, but there will always be that potential risk. We look at adaptive management. I didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about it today, but there are different scenarios within the GLMRIS report that react better to the advance of new technologies. Technological scenarios may be able to buy down risk sooner and target certain species that may achieve risk reduction for targeted species faster than that 10 or 25 years. Most importantly, if I leave you with one last kind of concept from my presentation today, is in fact that aquatic nuisance species control is a shared responsibility. The implementation of any of these aquatic nuisance species controls, or the construction, will require the input and the collaboration from a large group of stakeholders, members of the public, such as yourselves. Any kind of significant infrastructure involved investment or any kind of long-term strategy for prevention of aquatic nuisance species transfer is a shared responsibility. It is the responsibility of a wide range of federal, state, local stakeholders, as well as members of the public. As John alluded to, we are spending some time to try and take this message to as many cities within the region as possible. We're meeting with a number of different state agencies to meet with the stakeholders there and to ensure that there's a mutual understanding of what is in the report and how that information can be used for decision making. Feedback from yourselves is very important to us, which is why we are here tonight. We hope to collect this information and provide it along with the information that's in the GLMRIS report to the decision makers for future action. With that, I will conclude my remarks, and I will turn it back to Kevin to begin the comment period.